Hey everybody, it's Eric Foxman, Balanced Personal Training, and today I want to help you build one of the most important muscles in your body, and it is your mind muscle, your brain. And what I want to do is go over 10 terms with you that you may have heard a physical therapist say, or a trainer, or you read in a health and fitness magazine, and sometimes you hear the term and you're like, oh okay, and you just kind of let it go without really knowing what it means. So I'm going to break them up into 5 pairs, so they'll kind of go together. And without further ado, here we go. So the first term is a strain versus a sprain. Okay? So a muscle strain refers to an injury or a tear or an overstretching in a tendon or a muscle. So, for example, my poor, sorry sob story was 30 years ago. In the 200-meter sprint running track and field, I tore my hip flexor muscle, and I could hear it tear. I mean, it sounded like someone ripping a shirt, or like almost like a wicker basket. It's just a really terrible sound. So anytime I break spaghetti, dry spaghetti, and I put it in boiling water, I kind of have I have a reaction. I'm like, oh, muscle tear. And then I could hear it, I physically heard it, and then when I put my hand on my leg, I could feel it because there was an indentation where there was muscle. So it went like this, and it tore. Often with muscle strains, you might have contusions, bruising. There was a friend of mine who tore his hamstring, and I remember a few days later looking at the back of his leg, and the back of his leg was all purple. It was pretty nasty. So strain refers to muscles, versus a sprain refers to a joint or a ligament injury. And usually that occurs when that joint goes beyond its full range of motion. And the most common ones are injuries to the wrist and shoulders, ankles, and oftentimes because of someone falling. And if someone falls and they fall on their hand, or they're going backwards, and the range of motion in your wrist is only so far, but if it goes beyond, you could be tearing some ligaments. Things that people think about or they've heard is, I had a friend who had ACL surgery. So that's the anterior cruciate ligament in your knee. So a sprain versus a strain, okay? Strain is muscle tendon, a sprain is ligament, it's the joint. So those are the first two. The second things I want to talk about would be abduction versus adduction. Okay, sounds almost the same, but abduction refers to taking a limb or a part of your body away from the midline. So for example, it would be spreading your fingers, okay, the digits of your hand. They are moving away from the midline. Or if you work out at a gym and you see the abductor machine, okay, to work the side of your legs, and you sit on the machine and then your leg goes out to the side away from the midline. So that's abduction, and the other one is adduction. So you are adding that limb back to the midline. And I find that's probably one of the easiest ways to remember abduction versus adduction. I don't want to be like gruesome and say, oh, that person was abducted, they were taken away. I like to think of, okay, when you are adding something back in, that is adduction versus abduction. The next is pronation versus supination. And I'm really big about this because for many, many years, shoe companies who were making running shoes, were like, oh, we're going to do anti-pronation. Like somehow pronating was bad. And what pronating means is it means palms down or face down, or in the case of your feet, since you can't see my feet, it would be pushing off more on the big toe versus the pinky, okay? So if I was to ask a client, say, okay, would you lie on the mat and lie in the prone position, that would be face down. And if I said, okay, prone position for the hands would be palms that way. So anyways, back to what I was saying about shoe companies is everyone's saying, oh, that's bad, people having foot and ankle injuries. And if you remember, they were making these anti-pronation shoes and really building up the arch, and sometimes even having that arch support. That would be a Velcro strap, on the outside of the shoe. And then that would make people actually supinate more, okay? Supinating means lying face up. So if you were lying on a mat, you would be face up or palms up, or in the case of the foot, it would be lifting the foot up so you'd be more on your pinky. Well, that's really terrible when it comes to running. When you run, what is the biggest joint in your foot? It's the big toe. So the big toe is meant to take the load when you push and you propel and you drive forward. So, creating a shoe that would make you then supinate forces you to push off the smallest joint, your pinky, and then people would be getting, ankle problems. So basically the answer is, unless you really have some major issue, that your shoe is probably just fine. And when you sprint or you're running, often you're to be pushing off of the big toe and the second toe. Those are kind of where your force is going to be coming from. So that's pronation versus supination. Okay, the next two would be isometric versus plyometric. Okay, you've heard these all the time, like, oh, I'm going to do my isometric exercises. Now, I'm not going to talk about one being better than the other, or, is this good or bad. Iso means same, metric means length, same length. So an isometric exercise is when your joints are not moving and the force that you're pushing against is immovable. For example, trying to push up against a wall, okay, and then you're held in this static position where the wall's not moving, unless you're like the Incredible Hulk or something, and you aren't moving unless you are pushing yourself away. But if you're just holding there, creating that isometric tension, it's like doing this. If I push equally this direction and this direction, I'm at a standstill, and the muscles in the chest and shoulders are contracting, but I'm not moving anywhere, okay? Forearm plank is a great example of an isometric exercise, okay, versus plyometric. Now, plyometric exercises were really developed to develop power, speed, strength, and very often they're these shock, ballistic type exercises. So a lot of jumping sports, basketball players, volleyball players, sometimes tennis players, as well as world strongman competitors do some ballistic movements when they're doing some of their lifts. And so at your gym, you might see these plyometric boxes. I have one in the corner. And some people will jump up on the box, or they start up on the box and they land on the ground and then they leap up as high as they can. So when people talk about plyometrics, it could be maybe throwing a medicine ball against a wall, and those would be plyometric. So the difference between an isometric versus plyometric. Now the last two would be and this is probably the toughest one, and you might want to do more reading on it, is a concentric contraction versus an eccentric contraction. Now people go, well, I thought just when I lift my muscles contract, and they do, but there's couple different phases. So for example, a concentric contraction is when the muscles are shortening. Okay, so for example, you're doing a biceps curl, you've got a weight in your hand, and the tension that you are creating is allowing the muscles to shorten, and then the load, the weight moves up. Okay, that is a concentric contraction. Muscles are shortening and contracting, okay? So bicep curl, you're holding a dumbbell and then you're lifting up. That's the concentric part. The eccentric phase, which a lot of research is showing is equally as important, is what one calls the lowering, the slowing, the decelerating phase of contraction. So for the biceps, it would be lowering the weight down. The muscles are actually contracting, but either due to the weight that you're holding being so much, or you are allowing it the weight is overcoming the tension in your muscles. So there is contraction, but the muscles are allowing the weight to go down. So pitchers, golfers, MMA fighters, boxers, tennis players, you think about their movements when they're swinging or pitching or punching, and there's a deceleration phase to those movements. Well, that deceleration phase is the eccentric phase of contraction. So I leave you on that high note. If you want to be reading more, there are great websites out there. I always tell people check out Mayo Clinic and other reputable websites. But those are your 10 terms to help build the muscle vocabulary up here. Read more, do your research, and have a great day.